10 minutes past midnight, December 10, 1993. A university system administrator in Wisconsin is trying to upload a file. He can't. All 125 connection slots on his server are full, jammed by people waiting for the file he hasn't uploaded yet. That file was Doom, a dark science fiction shooter built by a company of just over a dozen people in Mesquite, Texas. Across the nascent internet, fans had been waiting for weeks. The administrator, David Dada, now faced a problem. He had to kick impatient users off his own server just so the game's creators could upload their highly anticipated 2-megabyte file. Once the 2-megabyte file was finally live, the digital floodgates opened. Within 30 minutes, an estimated 10,000 simultaneous download attempts overwhelmed the university's systems. The servers buckled, then crashed. The burgeoning internet had never seen anything like it. Across Usenet message boards, players had already begun complaining the game was late at 1 minute past midnight, before the file was even fully uploaded.
So we uploaded the shareware version of Doom to the University of Wisconsin server on December 10th of 1993. The excitement for the game was unprecedented. People were sitting on the server in the upload directory, creating files with sentences like, "When will we see Doom?" And we got random calls in the office asking when it would be out.
The university network's collapse was only the beginning of Doom's astonishing reach. Within 2 years, the game was a financial juggernaut, reportedly pulling in $100,000 a day in mail order registrations alone. Its explosive spread even outpaced the operating system it ran on. A Microsoft-commissioned sampling study conducted before the launch of Windows 95 found Doom installed on more personal computers than Windows 3.1 itself. This was not merely popular, it was a ubiquitous presence, a free digital virus that had infected the world's desktops. The company behind this digital omnipresence was remarkably small, never accepting a dime of outside investment. Through this era, id Software never grew past a couple dozen people. Yet by 1995, with roughly 13 employees, it reported revenue of $15.6 million. This was a new kind of business, a cultural force that dwarfed corporate giants, built from a single office without a single shareholder beyond its founders. The game's reach became undeniable, so much so that in 1995, the richest man alive felt compelled to put on a trench coat and digitally insert himself into Doom, using its power to market Windows 95 to the world. From this explosion of popularity, a new industry emerged, and the small company that built it would 2 decades later sell for a price never publicly announced. This is the story of that company and the 2 friends, both named John, who built it. They fused engineering purity with showman's fire, unleashing more energy than any game company before. The machine they created made them rich, made them enemies, and frightened a nation that was wrong about why it should be frightened. It outlived every human arrangement that created it, including, finally, the independence that made id Software matter. This is the story of the engine that ate the world. From borrowed computers in Shreveport in 1990, through a global phenomenon and a bitter breakup, to its sale in 2009, this is the story of id Software. In Shreveport, Louisiana, 1990, the digital content mill of its day was a company called SoftDisk. It operated as a disc magazine publisher, mailing physical floppy disks directly to subscribers every month. For a flat fee, customers received a new disc packed with articles, utilities, and, crucially, original software. This was disposable code, built to a deadline, meant to be consumed and replaced before the next monthly issue arrived. It was a constant churn of new creations, driven by the relentless rhythm of a subscription service. This relentless output fueled SoftDisk's specialized Gamer's Edge PC Games Disc, a product that never topped 3,000 subscribers. Yet, within that anonymous cubicle farm, 5 young men were quietly assembling. They were the group who would, collectively, define an entire generation of PC gaming. The first to join was John Romero, an ex-Origin programmer who arrived with a rock star's metal hair and an evangelist's need for an audience. He was a natural showman, quick to laugh, and driven by a visible, infectious passion for games. Romero possessed elite skill, quickly becoming not only id's best tools programmer, but also its finest level designer. The iconic E1M1 in Doom, for instance, would later be his creation. He had a gift for understanding what players wanted, and a restless energy that pushed boundaries, even coining the term deathmatch years before it entered the lexicon. By any measure, Romero was already a force of nature in the nascent world of PC development, convinced that games could be more than disposable code.
Next arrived John Carmack, a socially blunt freelancer from Kansas City. He spoke in engineering absolutes, seeing the world as a series of problems to be solved with logic and code. This was a man of unwavering, almost monastic focus, fueled by Diet Coke and a legendary, unchanging Domino's order that drivers delivered for over 15 years. Carmack was congenitally honest, a trait that made him utterly incapable of lying. It was an absolute adherence to truth that would soon prove both invaluable and profoundly inconvenient for the people around him.
Another key member was Tom Hall, a Wisconsin comedy brain who moonlighted as a designer. He approached games with a hitchhiker's guide to the galaxy absurdity, bringing a whimsical, narrative-driven perspective. Hall believed in games with real characters, stories, and settings, not just abstract mechanics. This made him the conscience of the group, always pushing for depth beyond the technical marvels. Also among them was Adrian Carmack, no relation to John. Adrian was a dark-minded painter who brought a stark visual sensibility to the team. He had learned the grim realities of flesh and gore from a hospital job, an experience that left him with a deep-seated hatred for anything cute. He was the artist who would later draw the demons. The final piece of this unlikely puzzle was Jay Wilbur, the steady hand who would become their business chief. He was the older brother figure who had recruited many of them in the first place, and for 5 crucial years, he would serve as the adult in the room, keeping a company of 20-somethings from flying apart. Wilbur was the one cooking ribs at the lake house while the others coded, grounding the wild talent with practical calm. The company that would house this talent drew its name from an earlier side venture, Ideas from the Deep, founded by Romero and Lane Roth in January 1989.
So I grew up in a wonderful small town in Northern California named Rockland. The population was only 6,000. In the 70s, I was massively addicted to spending loads of time in cold, dark arcades playing all the games there, and I got really good at playing them. So I hired John Carmack and Adrian Carmack, not related, into the department for programming and art. And then Tom Hall came in at night to help us out since he was already at SoftDisk and he loved making games. So this was the first time in 10 years that any of us had worked with one other person or more on any game, after making them alone, right, for a decade each, and it was incredible getting together.
The central technical challenge for PC games in 1990 was screen scrolling. Unlike dedicated gaming consoles, which boasted specialized hardware for moving game worlds smoothly, personal computers of the era struggled. Their graphics processors updated in visible, blocky segments, making any truly fluid motion a seemingly impossible feat. But on September 20th, 1990, John Carmack found a way. His ingenious solution, dubbed Adaptive Tile Refresh, focused only on redrawn the precise sections of the screen that were changing. It was an elegant, almost invisible software trick that overnight made a PC scroll with the seamless precision of a Nintendo. That same night, the breakthrough in hand, Carmack and Tom Hall immediately put it to the test. They painstakingly rebuilt the first level of Nintendo's Super Mario Bros. 3, tile for tile, recreating its iconic landscape on a PC. For a playable character, they dropped in Romero's own creation, the familiar sprite of Dangerous Dave. When they were finished, in the early hours of September 21st, they saved their illicit creation to a floppy disk. It was left on Romero's keyboard, bearing a Sharpie-scrawled label, Dangerous Dave, in copyright infringement.
Romero found the disk waiting for him. He slid it into the drive, and as the program loaded, he watched a PC do the impossible, scroll with console-quality smoothness. He instantly understood the magnitude of what he was seeing. As Romero remembers it, running that demo felt like everything had changed in that very moment.
So while creating our first game together, Slordax, John Carmack discovered the smooth scrolling trick on the PC. So Tom and John stayed up until 5 a.m. and they made a little demo called Dangerous Dave in copyright infringement. And so they put a disc on my desk. The next day, I came in, I saw the disc, I ran the demo, and I watched the screen scroll smoothly, pixel by pixel. And it was a massive eureka moment for me. It was like a bolt of lightning hit me, and I'll elaborate on why that was in a moment. But id Software was born that instant on September 20th of 1990.
Their next move was ambitious. The team built a complete, unauthorized Super Mario Bros. 3 PC demo and mailed it directly to Nintendo, hoping to secure an official contract to port the game. But the answer came back clear and firm: no. Mario, Nintendo insisted, would remain exclusively on Nintendo hardware. This rejection, while a blow, became the story's first critical turning point. The revolutionary scrolling technology, proven with Nintendo's own franchise, was now entirely theirs to keep. That full, unauthorized Super Mario Bros. 3 PC demo, once a secret, has since been preserved by the Strong Museum, a verifiable piece of history. The next call for Romero came from a different kind of industry player, Scott Miller, founder of the pioneering shareware publisher Apogee. Miller wanted Romero, but he knew SoftDisk meticulously screened its incoming mail, so he devised a scheme. Miller sent a series of fan letters, all praising Romero's work, each signed with a different fake name, but all bearing the same Dallas return address. Romero, noticing the pattern, called the number, intending to unmask the strange fan. Instead, he heard Miller's pitch for the nascent shareware model and a promise of a $2,000 advance for their first game. Romero, always observant, noticed a pattern: a stack of enthusiastic fan letters, each signed with a different name, but all sharing the exact same Dallas return address. He lined them up on his desk, the deception clear, and dialed the number, intending to confront the weirdo. He hung up instead with a destiny: not only a compelling pitch for the nascent shareware model, but also a $2,000 advance for their first game. Miller, as the story goes, sent a series of enthusiastic fan letters, each signed with a different fake name, but all sharing the same Dallas return address. Some of them read like this: Document. I have been incredibly impressed with your recent work. The innovative design and technical brilliance are truly captivating, and I eagerly anticipate whatever you create next. Keep up the amazing work. Miller's pitch introduced them to a new model: shareware. The idea was to release the first episode of a game for free, then sell the full version by mail order. From October to December 1990, the team put SoftDisk's equipment to use, just not during office hours. Every Friday night, they loaded their employer's powerful 386 computers into car trunks, driving them to a rented waterfront house on Cross Lake. There, fueled by Jay Wilbur's cooking, they would work through the weekend, building Commander Keen. This was, in essence, Grand Theft Office, executed in weekly installments, with the machines always returned to their desks before the Monday shift. Romero, sometimes wading through floodwaters in a storm to get there, felt the exhilarating pressure of their secret project. Inside that rented house, weekends blurred into a single, sustained act of creation. John Carmack would code for 30, 40 hours straight, lost in the flow of the machine, as lines of elegant code streamed across his screen. Jay Wilbur, the dependable anchor, fired up the grill to cook ribs, insisting everyone step away from their keyboards for sustenance. It was a communal effort, a shared obsession, where the boundaries between work and life dissolved in the pursuit of something impossible. The secret project, Commander Keen: Invasion of the Vorticons, finally went live on bulletin board systems through Apogee on December 14, 1990. The first episode, offered as shareware, quickly spread across the digital networks. By Christmas, just over a week later, the game had already brought in an estimated $30,000. The gamble paid off, far beyond what any of them had imagined. Just a month after Commander Keen's release, in January 1991, their first royalty check from Apogee arrived. The amount? $10,500. It was a sum that, for these young programmers, dramatically exceeded their combined soft disk salaries. In an instant, the need for their day jobs simply vanished. The exhilaration of their secret project, however, was about to collide with reality. Al Vacovius, SoftDisk's owner, had noticed the telltale signs. His employees were visibly exhausted, and the company's powerful 386 computers had a suspicious habit of traveling on weekends. He confronted John Carmack directly, and Carmack, congenitally incapable of lying, admitted everything without apology. He simply laid out the full scope of their weekend operation, the covert development of Commander Keen. For Vacovius, the man who had given them their start, it was a profound betrayal. Vacovius, reeling from the confession, proposed a joint venture to keep the talent under his roof. But his remaining staff, seeing this as a reward for theft, threatened to quit en masse. To avert a full mutiny, a different settlement was reached. The fledgling id Software, officially incorporated on February 1, 1991, would instead deliver one game every 2 months to SoftDisk for a set period. This unusual arrangement meant the public record now includes titles like Rescue Rover, nestled between their groundbreaking hits. These obligation games, including Hover Tank 3D and Catacomb 3D, inadvertently gave birth to the first-person shooter genre. The settlement was clear. id Software, officially incorporated on February 1, 1991, would deliver one game every 2 months to SoftDisk for a set period. This unusual arrangement meant the public record now includes titles like Rescue Rover, nestled between their groundbreaking hits. But 2 of those obligation games, Hover Tank 3D and Catacomb 3D, would accidentally invent the first-person shooter. Devastated by the betrayal, Vacovius found himself the sole casualty of an audacious heist that had, until that moment, seemed victimless to its perpetrators. The SoftDisk settlement, meant to punish the departing developers, instead became their forced research and development program. Under the agreement, id Software owed their old employer a new game every 2 months. The first of these obligation titles, Hover Tank 3D, shipped in April 1991, debuting what would become the first true first-person shooter engine. By November, they delivered Catacomb 3D, pushing the technology further with texture-mapped walls. Each game, born from a legal burden, became an accidental stepping stone. Without ever planning it, the id team was building the foundations of a new genre, one rapid technological leap at a time. The punishment had, ironically, become their apprenticeship. The young team, now free of their soft disk commitments, made their first move in late 1991, relocating north to Madison, Wisconsin. That harsh Midwest winter quickly proved too much. Their Apogee publisher, Scott Miller, saw the opportunity in their engine work and urged them south again. By early 1992, they were established in Mesquite, Texas, at the La Prada Apartments, a new base for a new kind of company. With the move to Texas, Softdisk alumnus Kevin Cloud joined the team, and Jay Wilbur, the older brother figure, formally took over the business, completing id's core family. The team's next project, Wolfenstein 3D, came from John Romero's simple pitch. Take the 1981 classic Castle Wolfenstein, then make it loud, fast, and let players mow down Nazis. This vision ran on an engine built by John Carmack, defined by a stark, almost philosophical discipline. It enforced right angles only, uniform wall heights, and no looking up or down. These weren't limitations, but choices, constraints that delivered unparalleled speed. Carmack's code was direct, efficient, and ruthlessly focused on getting the player into the action, unencumbered by complex scenery. Discipline, it turned out, was the fastest path to fun. On May 5, 1992, Wolfenstein 3D shipped. There was no retail box, no publisher, no marketing department. Instead, id Software uploaded the game's first episode, entirely free, to the sprawling network of bulletin board systems and online services. This was shareware, a radical new distribution model that circumvented the entire traditional industry, placing the game directly into the hands of players, one download at a time. Players plunged into a stark, maze-like castle, navigating endless corridors built entirely from right angles. The action was immediate and relentless. Find the keys, open the doors, and mow down every pixelated Nazi guard, SS officer, and guard dog that stood in the way. It was a visceral, bloody ballet of relentless forward motion, a digital shooting gallery that prioritized speed and pure combat over any complex narrative. The minimal graphics dissolved into the addictive thrill of clearing room after room, pushing ever deeper into the enemy stronghold. The initial hopes were modest. id Software projected sales of $60,000 for Wolfenstein 3D in its first month. The reality exploded past that. Their first royalty check alone, for a game that cost less than $5 to physically produce and distribute, arrived at $100,000. This wasn't a fluke. The game settled into a sustained run, generating roughly $200,000 every month for a year and a half. With virtually no overhead, the profits were staggering. This unprecedented revenue, flowing directly from players to developers, proved the shareware gamble had paid off beyond their wildest expectations. For a team of just 5 people, without a single investor, this was the moment they understood the astronomical margins of pure software. They had found the money curve with no precedent. This new financial power quickly attracted the attention of the established industry. Ken Williams, co-founder of Sierra Online, a titan of adventure games, made an offer, $2.5 million, but in stock. It was a tempting sum, a fortune on paper, but the IDD founders, wary of giving up control, had a counterproposal. They asked for $100,000 in cash up front, a sincerity test for an industry built on handshakes and paper promises. Williams balked. The deal died, and with it, IDD Software realized they didn't need the old gatekeepers. They could build their empire alone. The rejection of Williams's offer clarified id's path. They had bypassed the distribution gatekeepers with shareware. Now, they had proved they could bypass the financial ones too. No publishers, no outside investors, no acquirers. For a company of their size, the profits from Wolfenstein 3D were so profound that they simply did not need external capital. This moment, fueled by unprecedented success, hardened id Software's fierce independence. They would not seriously entertain selling the company again for another 12 years. The money manifested quickly. 2 Ferraris soon appeared outside the Mesquite office, one belonging to John Carmack, who turbocharged his until dealerships blacklisted him. The newfound wealth brought Ferraris, but also a stark utilitarian logic. As the story is told, John Carmack once announced to the office that his cat, Mitzi, was having a net negative impact on my life. A single, unblinking sentence of pure engineering calculus applied to a house cat, never disputed. This same mindset, favoring pure function above all else, formed the core of John Carmack's creative philosophy for games themselves. As reported in Masters of Doom, he once offered a stark maxim that would come to define id Software's engine-first approach and foreshadow every major creative split to come. Document. Story in a game is like story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not that important. For Carmack, the engine was the art, the mechanism of play paramount. But for his co-founders, especially Tom Hall and John Romero, the narrative, the world, and the experience were the point. This fundamental divergence, articulated with Carmack's characteristic bluntness, marked the end of the company's early innocence, laying bare the fault lines that would eventually fracture the team. By January 1993, with Doom still months from release, id Software was already predicting its impact. In a press release issued on New Year's Day, they made a bold promise. Document. The #1 cause of decreased productivity in businesses around the world. It was a claim that, as the year went on, would prove chillingly accurate. The boast proved prophetic. Soon, the game would be so disruptive that both Intel and Texas A&M banned it from their networks. To build a world that would consume so much productivity, id Software first needed new tools. John Carmack worked on elegant black Next machines, the sleek computers from Steve Jobs' Exile company, chosen for their superior capabilities in rendering and compilation. Wolfenstein had been a world of flat walls and 90-degree angles, a grid of constant light. But for Doom, Carmack engineered an engine that could do more. Now, environments featured variable light, angled walls, and a new kind of claustrophobic dread that felt impossible on a PC. This was not just a game, it was a technical declaration.
So we developed Doom on NextStep workstations. So they're far superior to DOS. NextStep eventually turned into OS X, OS 10. This also meant that one of our core principles was upheld. Great tools help make great games. We could make far better tools on NextStep. So DoomEd and QuakeEd were two of the most important tools that we used. They both really helped us create levels and test them very quickly.
The game's initial creative direction came from Tom Hall, who poured his vision into a comprehensive document known as the Doom Bible. This sprawling design Bible laid out a full science fiction narrative set on a world called Te Tenga. Hall envisioned specific characters, a detailed plot, and even 5 distinct playable protagonists. It was a game with a story and a world, not just a technical showcase. As he saw it, this was to be a rich, character-driven experience, far removed from the abstract shooter taking shape around Carmack's engine. Hall's vision, however, ran directly counter to the rapidly evolving engine. As Carmack's technology pushed for speed and abstraction, the intricate narrative of the Doom Bible began to unravel. Hall watched, piece by piece, as his characters and plot were discarded in favor of raw, unadulterated action. The company he helped create chose a path of pure mechanical power, prioritizing immediate impact over his grander story. This moment marked the first painful amputation, establishing a load-bearing theme for id Software. The creative director sacrificed to the engine.
Something about that a month ago.
Yeah. So that was, not fun. So Tom was, not very happy about that.
I feel something snapping.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mentally.
Yeah. When we were in Wolfenstein, I had, since it was something that was not an elegant part of the engine, I had to really, really, really fight for push walls. But it's like, you're going to be walking through things, opening doors, you got to have some secrets, I grew up, playing Mario and stuff like that. I want secrets. And so I really, really fought for push walls, finally got in, it's exciting. So that was kind of like snap zero of like, why am I fighting for something that would make the game so fun? And then sort of like, what was that month of work that was lost? So, but in that sense, did you hear that? I have. In that sense, I mean, Carmack was trying to get the best technology out there and what he could, the best way he can innovate, and I was trying to do the same, and just like that kind of clash heads a bit.
Yes.
The task of delivering the news fell to John Romero, deputized to let his friend down gently over dinner. But Romero, as he later remembered it, couldn't bring himself to do it. The conversation simply never truly happened. Instead, days later, in July or August of 1993, Tom Hall was formally asked to resign at a shareholders meeting. While the exact words exchanged remain a reconstruction, the message was clear. His intricate vision for Doom no longer aligned with the company's ruthless pursuit of speed and raw action. It was a wound that, for Hall, never fully healed. The company's resident artist, Adrian Carmack, had always chafed at Commander Keen's cuteness, a game he had been forced to illustrate. For him, the shift away from Hall's story-driven vision was also a kind of liberation. As Romero would later recount, Adrian exacted a small personal revenge. He hid an image of Commander Keen in a secret room within Doom 2, a final, quiet act against the forced cheerfulness and perhaps the friend who had embodied it. Hall's departure set the pattern. From then on, at IDD, the work would always come before the friend.
So then Tom leaves.
We depart. We parted ways, and we sort of had a meeting and just like parted ways. And after the meeting, I felt a deep sense of relief, because this thing is like just sort of been eating at me and been unhappy and not getting my creative juices out. And that led me to the realization that all of us wanted was creative happiness. Creative happiness always wins, and it will make things sort out. So Carmack wanted his technical creative happiness and to do what he wanted to do. John had found creative happiness. He's getting to do a lot more design, that he's brilliant at, instead of just like being hampered by tools and stuff like that. And this allowed me to get out.
The company moved quickly to fill the void, bringing in talent perfectly suited to its new, relentless pace. Sandy Peterson, a 37-year-old Mormon, arrived as a horror RPG legend, best known for designing the tabletop game Call of Cthulhu. He brought a dark imagination to the team, and in just 10 weeks, he built Doom's entire third episode. Then there was Dave Taylor, who, as the story goes, was so overwhelmed by playing the game that he famously lay down on the office floor. It was, in its own way, a review quote money couldn't buy, a visceral testament to Doom's raw power. These were the designers now shaping Doom. One, a master of dread working at impossible speed. The other, a player physically overcome by the experience.
John Carmack, ever the engineer, didn't just build the game's visuals, he taught himself network programming from a textbook. He connected 2 DOS machines in his office, creating a direct link for players to face each other. John Romero, the first to experience this raw new mode, was instantly electrified. As he remembered it in his memoir, the moment he scored the first kill, he screamed, "This is fucking awesome! This is the greatest thing ever!" He instantly coined the term Deathmatch for the frantic player-versus-player combat. And Kevin Cloud, watching the chaos unfold, added another word to the lexicon, frag. Together, they had unlocked a new dimension of digital competition.
This was more than a feature. It was multiplayer gaming, raw and visceral, arriving years before the internet infrastructure could even handle it.
Games based off of cheat codes that we had, and it was actually the internet created some cheat codes, so it was just like really furious at the very end. That last November, December was pretty crazy, and then basically that was December 10th is the day that we are putting the game up on the net. We had a 30-hour stretch at the very end of no sleep, 30 hours.
The game's release, after 30 straight hours of final testing, was set for midnight on December 10, 1993. Jay Wilbur, id's business chief, connected to the University of Wisconsin Parkside's FTP server, ready to upload the 2-megabyte shareware file. But he couldn't log in. All 125 connection slots were already filled, jammed by fans who had been waiting for the file since before midnight, alerted by Usenet posts and online communities. It was a digital stampede, already underway before the game was even available. On the other end of the line, University of Wisconsin Parkside Administrator David Data, a volunteer, watched the chaos unfold. He manually raised the server's connection cap, but the online crowd, desperate for the game, instantly filled the new slots as well. To even get their own shareware file uploaded, id Software had to kick users off the server. About 30 minutes after the 2-megabyte file finally landed, the sheer volume of downloads overwhelmed the system, crashing the entire university network. It was the internet's first true launch day stampede, a global event orchestrated by a small team and an overwhelmed college server. This was the game millions would soon download, a visceral plunge into a world of demons and shadows, rendered with a dizzying sense of 3 dimensions. It moved at a relentless speed, generating a raw, claustrophobic dread that felt less like a game and more like a fever dream on their home PCs. This was Doom.
That midnight, an overloaded college server accidentally birthed a new era, the instantaneous global distribution of software, defined by fan demand.
Was pretty crazy. And then basically that was December 10th is the day that we are putting the game up on the net. We had a 30-hour stretch at the very end of no sleep, 30 hours, everybody just running the game on every machine. We had a last-minute bug that was like, it was a really crazy bug that only if you knew everything about the technology would you know how to debug. But basically, the game runs on a timer, so even in the future with 50 gigahertz processors, this game will always run at the correct speed. But in doing that, using the timer at a low level, interrupt level, basically if the timer starts at some crazy random value when the game starts, there's a possibility that it could hit 0, and at that point the game just locks up. So we sometimes saw the game running on a bunch of machines and it would just randomly lock up for no reason at all. And only Carmack could figure out that it was the timer code that was wrapping when that happened. So he fixed that bug, and then it never, that was just like during that last time fixing that bug, and it was the last thing that we had in the game. So,
and ironically, Doom is uploaded to my college computers, University of Wisconsin.
To upload the game to the college, University of Wisconsin's FTP server, and everyone was waiting for it. So we had to, we had to try and get in there, get a slot in there to do an upload, which is what we did. And so, we were using a modem and putting the game up, and
totally couldn't hear.
And it blew up the whole server. And then we had to get on the phone with the sysop of the FTP server, and then we had to have him kick everybody off, and then we had to slot in again because we had hundreds of people trying to get onto the server to get the game, and we couldn't even get the game up on the server because they're sitting there. And then it blew up again. So the second time the game blew up, and then basically had to tell him to just lock everybody off so we could just upload it. And so he did that.
And now Bucky's happy.
And then the game was uploaded to the world and made its way across all the BBSs, and everybody knows the rest of the story.
But even as fans crashed university networks to download the game, Washington, D.C. had already turned its attention to video games. The day before Doom launched, on December 9, 1993, Senators Lieberman and Cole opened the very first United States Senate hearings on video game violence. The phenomenon and the moral panic it sparked were born in the same news cycle. From its very first day, Doom was not just a game, it was a national event, debated and feared even before most Americans could download it. Doom hit like a financial shockwave. At its peak, the shareware registrations alone brought in a reported $100,000 a day. not from storefronts or digital downloads, but as checks arriving in envelopes. This was a direct mail operation, managed by a company of just 13 people, processing thousands of orders day after day. They had no outside investors, no large corporate structure, and no established distribution networks. Instead, id Software built a cardboard box empire, where the game's success was literally measured in stacks of mail. By 1995, this lean, self-funded machine generated $15.6 million in revenue, a money curve with no precedent in the industry. The mail-order success was only half the story. When Doom 2 hit retail shelves in October 1994, distributed by GT Interactive, its initial print run of 600,000 copies sold through in about a month. It became the best-selling US computer software of 1994, beating out everything else on the market. In its lifetime, Doom 2 would gross over $100 million. By the numbers, Doom saw about 1.1 million mail order registrations, added another 1.36 million retail copies tracked through 1998, and its shareware was estimated to be on more than 10 million PCs. The reach of Doom's shareware was unprecedented. A Microsoft-commissioned sampling study, conducted before Windows 95 even launched, delivered a startling finding. It revealed that Doom was installed on more personal computers than Windows 3.1 itself. This wasn't a marketing slogan, it was a verifiable dataset, hinting at a new kind of ubiquity. While later claims would mistakenly upgrade this to Windows 95, the original study underscored how deeply id's game had embedded itself into the rapidly expanding PC landscape of the mid-90s. The astonishing ubiquity of Doom reportedly made Microsoft founder Bill Gates consider outright buying id Software. Instead, it directly spawned one of the most unexpected collaborations in tech history. Gates tasked a rising young program manager, Gabe Newell, with porting Doom to Windows 95, a critical step to showcase the new operating system's gaming capabilities. This partnership culminated in a promotional video released on Halloween 1995, where Gates himself appeared, composited into the game world, wielding a shotgun and wearing a trench coat. It was an image designed to shock, a vivid admission by the world's most powerful software company. Their future depended on the game that had just out-installed their own operating system. On October 30, 1995, Microsoft launched its Judgment Day event, complete with the Deathmatch 95 tournament finals at its Redmond campus. But the most jarring moment came when the company put its own founder front and center. Bill Gates, in that now iconic trench coat and shotgun, delivered a direct challenge. Who do you want to execute today to sell Windows 95? It was a bizarre, yet brutally effective endorsement. The richest man in the world was using the very game that had sparked a moral panic and that had just out-installed his company's existing operating system as the ultimate sales tool for its successor. It was an astonishing reversal, formalizing Doom's unexpected role as a mainstream cultural force. At its core, Doom was a relentless, visceral experience. Players navigated claustrophobic labyrinths, blasting through hordes of demons with a growing arsenal of weapons. The speed, the gore, and the sheer challenge created an addictive loop, transforming office PCs into battlefields. This was the game that stole millions of work hours, a digital contagion that proved irresistible. That disruptive power was soon felt in offices and universities. Intel and Texas A&M banned Doom from their networks, confirming the game's own boast from its 1993 press release. The panic around Doom was already reaching the highest levels of government. The Senate's first hearings on video game violence had opened on December 9, 1993, just one day before Doom's shareware release. These hearings, led by Senators Lieberman and Cole, ultimately produced a new rating system designed to classify game content. In September 1994, the Entertainment Software Rating Board, or ESRB, was established. Weeks later, when Doom 2 shipped at retail, it carried the ESRB's new M rating, signifying mature content.
The system the moral panic demanded was now in place, yet it did little to slow the game's accelerating sales.
The conversation around video game violence soon moved from Capitol Hill to the courtroom. After the December 1997 Heath High School shooting in Paducah, Kentucky, victims' families filed a $33 million lawsuit, naming id Software among roughly 25 media defendants. 2 years later, following the Columbine tragedy in April 1999, a staggering $5 billion suit, Sanders v. Claim, again targeted id and many others. Both cases were dismissed by federal courts. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, affirming the Paducah dismissal in August 2002, delivered a definitive ruling that effectively closed the era of litigation. It is simply too far a leap from shooting characters on a video screen to shooting people in a classroom.
But the courts ultimately disagreed. After years of litigation, federal judges dismissed the lawsuits, ruling that game creators could not be held responsible for the actions of players. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, affirming the Paducah dismissal in August 2002, delivered a definitive statement that would protect games as a form of expression. It is simply too far a leap from shooting characters on a video screen to shooting people in a classroom.
The Columbine tragedy in April 1999 reignited the national debate, with widespread reports that shooter Eric Harris had meticulously recreated his school within Doom. While Harris genuinely created levels for the game, his wads still survive. The endlessly repeated claim that he built a playable replica of Columbine High School was false. No such level has ever surfaced. His actual creations were ordinary user-made maps, but the myth of a school recreation, amplified by repetition, became a powerful, if manufactured, part of the story.
But even as courts dismissed lawsuits, another branch of government saw Doom's power very differently. In 1996, Marine Corps Commandant Charles Krulak ordered his forces to actively exploit commercial war games for training. At Quantico, Lieutenant Scott Barnett and Sergeant Daniel Snyder spent 6 months converting Doom 2 into a sanctioned simulator. This Marine Doom became a 4-Marine fireteam trainer, deploying the very game blamed for civilian violence to prepare soldiers for combat. It was a stark irony. Congress, even as it debated the game's dangers, was simultaneously overseeing a military that installed it on its own machines.
The irony was absolute. While lawmakers in Washington held up Doom as evidence of societal decay, the U.S. Marine Corps was quietly installing it to train its own soldiers for combat. By 1995, the internal conflict at id Software was structural, not personal. John Carmack had committed to rebuilding the engine from the ground up, chasing true 3D graphics and an entirely new client-server networking model. This was an unprecedented technical challenge, demanding his full focus for a year. But for the designers, it meant they couldn't build levels against a constantly shifting foundation. John Romero, with his vision for a dark fantasy melee game, watched his ambitious ideas clash with the engine's evolving reality. The company reached an impasse: either wait indefinitely for the full vision or ship a compromise. The pragmatists proposed a simpler game, effectively Doom in true 3D, and after a year of development, Romero relented.
The game John Romero imagined was a radical departure, a dark fantasy melee title infused with RPG elements that would challenge every expectation of a first-person shooter. But the relentless technical hurdles and the strain of development pushed the team to its breaking point. As the months wore on and the crunch deepened, a pragmatic solution emerged. Scale back the ambition, deliver what the engine could reliably do. A simpler, faster game, essentially Doom in a full 3D world. Romero fought it, but the weight of the team's exhaustion and the endless delays eventually forced his hand.
The pressure on the team was immense, driving Carmack to seek help from the industry's best. He lured Michael Abrash, a graphics legend, directly from Microsoft to co-write Quake's revolutionary renderer. Abrash delivered,
but the intensity of the crunch meant he returned to Microsoft almost immediately after the game shipped. His temporary contribution underscored the project's all-consuming nature, a company stretched to its limits even with outside help. The compromise did not ease the pressure, it simply redirected it. The final push for Quake became a crucible, a brutal death march that stretched for 7 straight months, from December 1995 to June 1996. Staff worked 7-day weeks, often sleeping under their desks, pushing past any reasonable human limit to ship the game. Decades later, the scars remained. As recently as 2025, former designer Sandy Peterson publicly stated that Quake's development broke id Software. John Carmack, responding directly to Peterson, offered a rare public apology. "I pushed hard. I was not a good leader." For a company built on engineering purity, the human cost of that ambition was still being processed on the record, 30 years after the fact, an extraordinary public recording. The brutal 7-month sprint ended on June 22, 1996, when Quake finally shipped. After months of grueling work, the game that had nearly consumed id Software was ready for the world. By his own account, John Romero himself was the one who uploaded the shareware version to the servers that night, alone in the quiet office. The man who had once screamed with exhilaration, declaring the very first Deathmatch the greatest thing ever, now performed the solitary act of releasing the game that had pushed his company to its breaking point. It was a stark and quiet end to a project that had been anything but, marking a profound shift from collective triumph to individual isolation. When Quake finally arrived in June 1996, the technical compromise was instantly overshadowed by the sheer leap it represented. Players plunged into fully rendered, true 3D environments, free to look up, down, and navigate complex, multi-level geometry. This was no longer flat plane combat. It was a visceral, fluid experience, and the 7 months of brutal crunch had delivered a game that redefined what a PC could render, instantly setting a new standard for the entire industry.
So Quake is the game that introduced the world to mouse look, to high-speed true 3D worlds, texture mapped, and internet multiplayer. So clans sprung up immediately as soon as the game came out, and esports and tournaments were starting all over the place. So Quake World launched 5 months later to smooth out the internet gameplay.
The public, however, was about to get a glimpse inside id's singular culture. Wired magazine's August 1996 cover story, titled "The Egos at id," landed on newsstands just as the company was grappling with its deepest internal fracture. The article, penned by Mark Laidlaw, who would months later go on to write Valve's Half-Life, captured John Carmack as the modern quintessence of boy genius. It detailed his turbocharged Testarossa, a car so out of place that neighbors assumed it belonged to a drug dealer. And it quoted the company's famous mantra for release dates, "As soon as it is finished." The piece laid bare the forces tearing it apart, even as it celebrated their genius. The August issue of Wired, on newsstands, landed at the exact moment id Software was preparing to force John Romero's resignation. 6 weeks after Quake's release, the inevitable conversation finally came. On August 6, 1996, John Romero walked into a meeting where the other owners presented him with a pre-decided ultimatum. John Carmack, as Kushner tells it, had already signaled before the game even shipped that "we're going to have a talk" once Quake was done. Now, the moment had arrived. Faced with a choice already made, Romero resigned under duress, severing his ties with the company he had co-founded and the friendship that had built an empire. Publicly, John Carmack framed Romero's departure as a matter of performance, suggesting his co-founder was simply not working hard enough. But Romero, in his own account, remembers it very differently. He points to his substantial contributions during Quake's turbulent development, shipping the critical Quake Ed level editor, designing many of the game's most iconic maps, and actively securing crucial licensing deals for id's technology. Romero argued these efforts were made while he waited over a year for Carmack's constantly evolving engine to stabilize, a fundamental clash between design ambition and engineering reality. The substance of their irreconcilable visions was certain. The precise words exchanged in that August meeting, however, exist only in reconstruction, a contested narrative that would echo for decades. The terms of Romero's exit were stark. He received a 5-year co-founder severance, but no royalties from Quake, the very game he had fought to define. The partnership that had built an industry, the volatile fusion of Carmack's engineering brilliance and Romero's showman's fire, was finally extinguished. The two Johns, who had once rebuilt Super Mario Bros. 3 overnight on a borrowed PC, now stood on opposite sides of a chasm that would take decades to bridge.
Years later, John Carmack would express regret over the way his co-founder was forced out, blaming his own immaturity at the time. But that reconciliation would take decades. Six weeks after Quake shipped, John Romero was out of id. But he wasted no time. On November 15, 1996, he incorporated Ion Storm in Dallas, a direct challenge to the engineering-first ethos that had pushed him out. He held roughly 30% of the new company. At his side was Tom Hall, the original creative director, back with a 20% stake. The two amputated founders reunited. Their motto, emblazoned on the letterhead, was a declaration of war. Design is law.
The ambition was immediately backed by capital. On Christmas Eve 1996, Ion Storm signed a $22 million deal with publisher Eidos, securing funding for 6 new titles, an offer they accepted only after rejecting a smaller, less expansive bid. But 9 days earlier, back at id Software, John Carmack had already moved the industry forward in a different way. He had released Quake World, a free netcode rewrite whose client-side prediction made Internet Deathmatch instantly playable on dial-up connections. Romero was building his empire with millions. Carmack was giving away the future. By spring of 1997, Ion Storm's grand vision materialized in concrete form. The company leased the entire 54th floor of Dallas's Chase Tower, claiming a sprawling 22,000 square feet. This opulent headquarters, perched under the tower's distinctive glass crown, represented a direct investment in the "design is law" ethos. The build-out alone cost over $2 million, transforming the space into a custom-designed monument to gaming. It featured a dedicated arcade and even a professional deathmatch arena, a clear symbol of Romero's ambition to dominate the industry from the top down. Yet this monument to design was immediately plagued by a fundamental flaw. The dazzling glass crown, intended as a symbol of aspiration, channeled so much sun into the workspace that monitors became unreadable. The very designers tasked with creating Daikatana, a game built on darkness and shadow, were forced to drape black cloth over their screens just to see their work. This absurdity, chronicled by the Dallas Observer, became a stark visual summation of Ion Storm's early reality, a company built on a grand vision, literally struggling to see in its own light. Just as the physical space proved unwieldy, Ion Storm's public persona took a defiant turn. In April 1997, a full-page black-on-red advertisement appeared in gaming magazines, declaring, "John Romero's about to make you his bitch, suck it down." Romero himself approved the provocative slogan. It was a direct challenge intended to shock and assert dominance, yet it alienated the very audience he aimed to impress. Years later, Romero would reflect on the profound miscalculation, stating, "Up until that ad, I felt I had a great relationship with the gamer. That ad changed everything. The promise of a game became a threat, and the showman's bravado began to unravel." The game that underpinned that audacious campaign, Daikatana, had been promised for Christmas 1997. It would finally go gold more than 2.5 years later, on April 21, 2000. The delay came at a staggering financial cost.
By the time Daikatana finally shipped, it had consumed roughly $26 million of Eidos's money. At its peak, the Dallas office was burning through about $900,000 every single month. This enormous expense was poured into a game built on technology that was already visibly outdated, id Tech 2, the Quake 2 engine. The ultimate irony was that Ion Storm, founded to challenge id's engineering-first dominance, was paying its rival for the very engine it was now flopping on. It was an arithmetic of hubris, where every dollar spent amplified the growing disconnect between vision and reality. Amidst Ion Storm's financial struggles, id Software was also undergoing a quiet transformation. In 1997, Jay Wilbur, the business chief who had helped found and stabilize the company, departed to join Epic Games, the future home of their direct rival, Unreal. Then, on November 19, 1998, the collapse came. The core Daikatana team at Ion Storm's Dallas office resigned en masse, a coordinated exodus triggered by a coded message spread through the company server. Document register, the monkey has landed. It was a devastating internal implosion. That very same day, thousands of miles away, Valve Corporation shipped Half-Life, a game built on heavily modified Quake code. Romero's ambitious project, founded to prove the supremacy of design, was hemorrhaging talent just as a rival, forged from id's own engine, redefined the industry. The grand experiment was consuming itself. The timing of these events was stark. As Ion Storm's core team resigned, leaving its grand Dallas office behind, Valve Corporation released a game that fundamentally shifted the industry, Half-Life. This new standard-bearer for narrative and immersion ran on a heavily modified version of id's Quake engine. id's engineering prowess, the very force Romero had sought to transcend, was quietly powering the next wave of gaming innovation. The design era Ion Storm was built to win had just been redefined, not by its own ambition, but by a game built on its rival's code. The internal implosion of Ion Storm quickly became a public spectacle. 6 weeks after the mass resignation, on January 14, 1999, the Dallas Observer published Stormy Weather, a 10,000-word exposé that laid bare the company's internal chaos. The article was built on a trove of leaked emails, revealing the true scale of the burn rate and the growing dysfunction. The very next morning, Ion Storm responded by subpoenaing the reporter, a stark move in a state where no shield law protected journalistic sources. The company that promised to make gamers its bitch was now fighting to keep its own secrets from public view. The fight to control the narrative was quickly lost. By June 1999, the financial reality became undeniable. Eidos converted roughly $25 million of its earlier advances into a controlling 51% stake in Ion Storm. The original architects of the Eidos deal, Mike Porter and Todd O'Flaherty, were ousted. The money had finally taken the company. The game that had once been promised as the future of design finally arrived. Daikatana, after consuming millions and sparking an industry-wide scandal, shipped in April 2000. But the numbers it posted were brutal. In its first 3 months, Daikatana sold just 8,190 copies in the United States. Its lifetime worldwide total barely reached 200,000. The grand pronouncements, the penthouse, the defiant ad campaign, all of it had culminated in a commercial failure of historic proportions. The catastrophic sales figures for Daikatana seemed to confirm every doubt about Ion Storm's approach. Yet, just weeks after that commercial failure, a quiet counter-narrative emerged from the company's other outpost. Far from the Dallas penthouse, Ion Storm's Austin office, led by designer Warren Spector, shipped Deus Ex. This ambitious blend of role-playing and first-person shooter was immediately hailed as a masterpiece, earning widespread critical acclaim and ultimately winning Game of the Year. It was a profound twist. Romero's design-first thesis
executed not with his own showmanship, but with a Carmack-grade discipline, had finally delivered. Both Johns, in their own ways, had been right. Neither, it seemed, could be right alone.
The commercial failure of Daikatana and the quiet triumph of Deus Ex marked the end for Ion Storm's original vision. Romero and Hall departed in July 2001, and Eidos closed the Dallas office just days later.
Back in id's orbit, a different kind of empire was taking shape. The competitive scene enabled by Carmack's Quake World netcode found its first star on June 21, 1997, at E3 Atlanta. Nearly 1,900 online entrants had funneled into a 16-player final for the Red Annihilation tournament. Dennis "Thresh" Fong, a 20-year-old from Los Angeles, dominated his opponent, Tom Entropy Kimsey, with a score of 14-1. His prize, John Carmack's own cherry red Ferrari 328. Guinness World Records recognizes Fong as the first professional gamer, marking the moment esports was born, not in a penthouse, but as a title transfer, a car for a headshot.
The competitive spark ignited at Red Annihilation quickly flared into an organized force. Just 6 days later, in Dallas, ex-stockbroker Angel Munoz founded the Cyber Athlete Professional League. Its existence ensured that id's games would remain the battleground for a new kind of sport. 2 years later, the Arena War of 1999 saw Unreal Tournament and Quake 3 Arena ship just 10 days apart, a contest refereed by every LAN party on Earth, with Quake 3 ultimately winning the competitive scene. As id's games became the proving ground for esports, its engine became the bedrock of the industry itself. The code that powered Half-Life was just the beginning. Its next iteration, id Tech 2, powered a generation of shooters, including Hexen 2 and Sin, and in a final twist of irony, even Daikatana, meaning Ion Storm paid Romero's old company for the technology it flopped on. Then id Tech 3 fueled Medal of Honor Allied Assault, a game whose development team would go on to found Infinity Ward and build Call of Duty. In effect, id's code became the literal ancestor of the biggest shooter franchise ever. And on December 21, 1999, John Carmack made a different kind of move. He released the Quake source code under the GPL, a Christmas gift that seeded a generation of programmers.
The engine that refereed the world's LAN parties was Quake 3 Arena. Its fast, pure combat became the undisputed standard for competitive play, a brutal test of reflexes and strategy. Every basement gathering, every convention hall tournament became a proving ground for id's unforgiving code, cementing its place as the definitive arena shooter. This wasn't just a charitable act. While id Software was licensing its advanced engines for hundreds of thousands of dollars, essentially becoming the landlord of the industry it helped create, Carmack simultaneously offered up the very foundation of its success to the world. It was a Christmas gift, freeing the Quake source code under the general public license. In one gesture, id monetized its cutting-edge technology and then gave away its history, seeding a new generation of programmers and modders with the raw materials of their next revolution. The company was at once capitalist and utopian.
While id monetized its cutting-edge tech and open-sourced its history, its bench of talent began to empty. Sandy Peterson departed for Ensemble Studios, Jay Wilbur for Epic, and American Magia was fired, later creating Alice for EA.
By June 2000, John Carmack's engineering vision was absolute. He forced the company's next major project, a remake of Doom, through over the objections of fellow owners Adrian Carmack and Kevin Cloud. The Engine Man, now at the height of his power, overruled the artists he had once co-founded the company with. The bet paid off. Doom 3 swept E3 2002 as best of show. Even a November 2002 alpha leak, traced to graphics card partner ATI, couldn't stop its momentum. The game shipped on August 3, 2004, and would become id's biggest seller to date. The game ultimately sold more than 3.5 million copies, cementing its status as id's biggest seller yet. This success did not go unnoticed. Later that same year, 2004, Activision made a reported $105 million offer to acquire id Software outright. But the company, which had never taken outside investment, remained convinced of its own path and turned it down. But the internal conflicts over Doom 3 and the company's future had taken their toll. In 2005, Adrian Carmack, the artist who had painted id's demons since the beginning and the last co-founder besides John, was ousted. The company initially spun his departure as a retirement, but Adrian sued. He alleged in court filings that his employment agreement forced him to sell his 41% stake at a formula price near $11 million. This, he claimed, was after he had refused a $20 million buyout and against Activision's recent offer, which implied his stake was worth closer to $43 million. The case settled confidentially, but the artist who drew the monsters was now suing the company he had helped build. The details of the settlement remained sealed. The man who had given form to id's infernal landscapes, who had painted every demon since the company's earliest days, ended his story suing the very entity he helped create. Adrian Carmack, the dark artist, went on to purchase and run a 5-star golf resort in Ireland. His departure marked the final amputation of a co-founder from the company that had once been a shared dream. That same year, Hollywood tried its hand at id's flagship property. Universal's Doom movie opened at number 1, but quickly collapsed, earning just $58.7 million worldwide against its $60 million budget. John Carmack, however, was already looking beyond id's current projects. His attention had shifted to a new passion: rockets. Through his company Armadillo Aerospace, he began competing in NASA's Lunar Lander Challenge. In 2008 and 2009, Armadillo Aerospace won $850,000 across 2 levels of the competition. Meanwhile, Carmack still pushed id's technical boundaries, demonstrating id Tech 5's revolutionary megatexture at Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference in June 2007. The boy genius who built the engine that powered an industry seemed increasingly compelled by challenges outside the gaming world. Carmack's expanding interests outside id Software soon attracted Robert Altman, a Washington lawyer and founder of ZeniMax Media, who began courting him with backing from Providence Equity. On June 24, 2009, ZeniMax Media officially acquired id Software. There were no cameras, no public signing ceremony, only a press release announcing the deal. The purchase price itself was never disclosed by either company, but public filings would later piece together the financial picture. An SEC Form D revealed $105 million in notes, and John Carmack's own 2017 lawsuit brought his personal $45.1 million convertible note to light. Reconstructions from these records put the best reported total for the acquisition at roughly $150 million. The last independent titan of PC gaming had finally sold. John Carmack, however, framed the sale not as an end, but as a strategic future. He understood the industry id had helped create. Document: EA or Activision would have made id one more studio, competing for resources with our brother and sister studios, while ZeniMax had zero overlap, a perfect hand and glove fit. The company that had refused all prior offers now believed it had found a partner that respected its independence. Ultimately, the company that had defined digital independence for 2 decades finally ceded it. The estimated $150 million deal marked the end of an era. Id, which had never taken outside investment, chose a buyer that felt least like a boss. But the core irony was that independence itself, the fierce, unyielding spirit that had powered its every breakthrough, was the one thing id Software couldn't ultimately ship. 6 weeks later, at QuakeCon, the news was met with cheers from a loyal fan base,
celebrating a future they hoped would protect the legacy, unaware of the deeper loss. Ultimately, even that carefully chosen partner couldn't hold John Carmack. He departed for Oculus just 4 years later, and by 2021, the entire id Software enterprise was folded into Microsoft's $8.1 billion acquisition of ZeniMax.
And we're looking at this and thinking, people are going to think ZeniMax isn't cool, like they're canceling QuakeCon or something. This just isn't right. So it was such a good thing that everybody ran around scrambling for a couple weeks, and we managed to get the Gaylord back here, which has always been a great location for QuakeCon. So I'm amazed it's all gone as smoothly as it has. Thing. But as Activision grew as a company and they brought more studios on, they had other people that were doing similar things, and we would find that as an external developer, we're to some degree competing with our own publisher there. And there's nothing, they're not colluding about it or anything, it's just a natural way that things happen. If you're part of a company there and you have your internal IP that you've spent tens of millions of dollars developing, and you've got your external IP that you're paying a really large royalty rate to this company for, if you've got a choice about how certain things are done, whether it's marketing resources or how you want to present things, how you want to slate things, marketing, production resources, these decisions, just as a large company, they get made in their
With id now part of ZeniMax, the company's next major release, Rage, arrived in 2011. While critically acclaimed for its technical ambition, it sold only moderately, a stumble for a studio known for seismic shifts. But John Carmack had already begun looking past pixels. Virtual reality, once a sci-fi dream, was taking tangible shape, and Carmack, ever the technologist, saw its potential. In August 2013, he became Chief Technology Officer for Oculus, a startup building consumer VR headsets. Just 3 months later, on November 22, 2013, he officially resigned from id Software. The man who had built every foundational engine, who had spent over 2 decades pushing polygons and pixels, finally left the company he co-founded to chase a new frontier. Just over 7 years after Carmack's departure, the company he co-founded found itself part of a much larger corporate shift. In March 2021, Microsoft officially closed its acquisition of ZeniMax Media for $8.1 billion. This meant id Software, the studio that had once famously seen its game installed on more PCs than Windows itself, was now a subsidiary of Microsoft. The fiercely independent company, which had navigated decades without outside investment, had become a single, valuable asset within the maker of the world's most ubiquitous operating system. Its journey, from a small Shreveport office to a global empire, concluded by joining the very system it once seemed to transcend. Amidst the tectonic shifts of the industry, another kind of finality arrived. This year, Bobby Prince, the Vietnam veteran lawyer who composed Doom's iconic scores, passed away at 81. His death underscored that the witnesses to id Software's founding saga, now in their 50s and 80s, would not be here forever, making their first-hand accounts increasingly vital. John Carmack, meanwhile, has moved on to building artificial general intelligence at Keen Technologies, a company named, like so much in this story, for where it all began. For John Romero, the path after id Software led back to his creative origins. In 2023, he published his memoir, Doom Guy: Life in First Person, a detailed account where he revealed a rare memory condition, hyperthymesia, allowing him unusually precise recall of dates and events, a claim that often proved accurate. He continued to engage directly with the community that never left, creating new, free Doom levels like Sigil, decades after the original game shipped. His studio, Romero Games, established in Galway, Ireland, proved resilient, navigating and surviving Microsoft's broad industry funding cuts in 2025. The legendary designer,
still building. Even as Romero continued to engage with his loyal community, the legacy of id Software itself proved unstoppable. In May 2025, Doom: The Dark Ages arrived, described as the biggest launch in id history. It racked up 3 million players in just about 5 days. 35 years after a group of friends incorporated id Software in a Shreveport office, the machine the two Johns built was still running, still growing, and still defining what a first-person shooter could be for a new generation of players.
Yet for all the shifting empires and new frontiers, the most unexpected outcome of this long story was personal. The deathmatch between the two Johns, once thought irreparable, ended in a draw both could live with. Today, John Carmack and John Romero appear together on stage, warm and reflective. Carmack has publicly expressed regret for the rupture, blaming his own immaturity for the events that tore them apart in 1996. Romero, for his part, has openly accepted that accountability. The architects of a new world, once estranged by the forces they unleashed, found a way back to a friendship nobody would have scripted.
The story then returns to its quiet beginning. Today, at 7450 Lakeshore Drive in Shreveport, Louisiana, the rented house overlooking the water still stands. The trees have matured, the lake is calm. But in the fall of 1990, those rooms were a secret workshop where 5 young men, on borrowed computers, built the core of an engine that would redefine an industry. For nearly 2 tumultuous decades, from those stolen nights to its sale in 2009, id Software remade the world of play, leaving an indelible mark on culture, technology, and the very idea of what a computer could do.